Hello everyone, welcome back to another Doctor Who Gut Check, the 73-yard edition. Now, this is a Doctor-lite story, and if you know the channel, you'll know that I'm not a huge fan of Doctor-lite stories. I don't like Blink. Before you start angry comments, I know that is probably the hottest Doctor Who take, I've got to say. I just don't like it. I like my Doctor to be in Doctor Who. And, you know, with this being a Doctor-lite story, I was a little bit apprehensive about it. And reading the sort of press release that this is going to be a folk horror story, and loving, you know, the Damons and, you know, the Philip Hinchcliffe era, that's sort of my jam of Doctor Who. I love the sort of Gothic era sort of type stories Doctor Who does. And we'll talk more about the folk horror element in a minute. And with Russell praising that this is the best thing he's ever written, and Russell's wrote some amazing Doctor Who, like Love and Monsters, and you know he's written you know, fantastic drama like Years and Years, It's a Sin, and for him to say that this is the best thing he has written, that's high praise. So with that all said, what did I think of 73 Yards? Well, I think that it could be my favourite of the series. Now that's quite a bold thing to say, because this episode seems to be quite split in the middle. You either really love it or you sort of a bit lukewarm on it, really. I think Boom is probably the better Doctor Who story, but I really like this. 73 Yards feels like a Inside Number 9 Doctor Who episode, and I think that's what I like about it. The lack of a title sequence. This story is going for something completely different. Again, all 4 episodes we've had so far have been sort of breaking the genre of what we can do with Doctor Who. And having no title sequence adds to this sort of dream-like quality to it, because this story, it doesn't wrap up in a neat little bow. We'll talk about how creepy that ending is in a minute. Well, I say in a minute, probably towards the end of the video. But, you know, not every Doctor Who story needs to wrap up in a neat bow and go, that's it. This is left very ambiguous, and I like that. I like that this story leaves you as an audience member to question what you've watched and to think about it and add your own little spin to it, you know, and I think that's great. And we'll talk about my little theories as well I have on this story. But I want to start off with the folk horror element. The folk horror element, like I said, I'm a huge sucker for that type of thing. I love folklore and incorporating it with Doctor Who. And if you love the sort of the fairy circle idea, there's a brilliant 12th Doctor novel called The Shining Man by Cavan Scott. And if you want to explore sort of the boggart realm, the sort of fairy dimension where the Doctor could have gone, check out that, because it feels like that story could fit into RTD2, with sort of the idea of sort of vloggers hunting after sort of the folklore, the supernatural. So check out that book, because it's a really good book as well. But yeah, I love the idea of the sort of build up to it with sort of the little notes around it and sort of stepping into it, you know, and I love how it's sort of set on sort of a coastline where it's either or, so you can imagine that there'll be other dimensions sort of lurking on sort of the edge between, you know, the land and the sea, to quote that possible Sea Devil spin-off if it happens. So I really like that idea, and I think that's where the story's at its strongest and sort of at its most creepiest in a way. But I think the most scariest thing about this story was Ruby paying £5 for a Coke. That was pretty scary, because Cosy lives. That's real. So with the Doctor gone, Ruby is left on her own, and I think this links to sort of the dream idea where she sees a figure in the distance and it's following her, and I think that is beautifully done on sort of the Welsh sort of coastline, you know, with like the seagulls around. I think that's a really great visual, and having the TARDIS, you know, on top of a cliff, it's sort of very much like the season 11 sort of promo of Jodie Whittaker's sort of costume reveal in a way. But I love the sort of idea of sort of a TARDIS sort of being left to sort of become part of the sort of fairy circle and part of that shrine, and it sort of reminds me of sort of that line in sort of Parting of the Ways, you know, let the TARDIS rot and leave on a street corner, and it will just become part of the landscape, really. And I love that, and it's a nice little call to the Respond to All Calls sort of Big Finish trailer, and I just like that sort of visual of it. But going back to sort of the dreamlike quality, we have Ruby seeing Susan Twist's character, the hiker, and you know, in dreams you sort of see people's faces that you might recognise, and I think that was a nice little aspect to it, because I think that this story is sort of an embodiment of Ruby's fears, you know, that she is scared of being abandoned. You know, she's been abandoned before as a child, and she's scared of that abandonment. And I think that is what the woman who is following her in 73 Yards is, the sort of personification of abandonment and that fear of being left alone and being isolated. And you know, this story does leave Ruby quite isolated. You know, she goes to you know, a pub, a place where you think will be safe, you know, be a warm welcome, you can get warm, you can have a bed for the night, but you have the villagers playing with her, playing into sort of, I guess, the stereotypes what people may have. She can't, because, you know, you've got the villagers toying with, which is great. You have the wonderful Dame Charm Phillips there, you know, playing, I think, Enid, and the wonderful close-ups you get of that really helps that sort of unsettling element to the story where you think, oh wow, Mad Jack is a real thing, and that's really quite creepy, and he's been unleashed. And you know, we see Ruby go back to her home, and I think this is one of the negatives I have with the story, is Carla and Sherry. I love the characters, I think they're great, but I think that this story, it would have worked better if we had spent more time with them, because when Carla's talking about the Doctor, we missed that moment of the Doctor, you know, talking, you know, at the end of Space Babies, you know, like, oh, don't tell her not to slap me. That moment happened off screen, so I don't feel like there's as much of a connection there is to these two characters. Say if it was Series 1 with Jackie, who I feel like was very much embedded into the furniture and the kitchen sink drama of Series 1. I don't think we quite had that with there. I think that's where one of the elements of the story kind of fails and lets it down. But another thing what I did like, because I've just been reminded of the sort of the train sequence of seeing the woman, you know, be there at 73 yards, and I think that's great, because sometimes in the corner of your eye you sort of think you're seeing things, and I think that's a good little thing, continuing that dream-like quality. So we move away from the folk horror element. Like I say, I think that's probably where the story's at its most strongest, because it's got a great dripping atmosphere to it, and just sort of the Welsh countryside adds to that feel to it. But we have the sort of political element with Roger ap Gwilliam, which is kind of very fitting timing what's happening in UK politics. And obviously we have a little reference to him at the start with the Doctor going, oh, he's a bit of a nutcase. And I think for the most part he seems pretty tame. I know there's sort of an element of sort of with a character who Ruby sort of gets pally with, that there's something going on between there, whether he sort of abused her. But I think that we needed to see maybe a little bit of an outburst to say that, oh, he's a wrong and he's a bit of a bad one. But yeah, I think that was sort of a nice sort of play into sort of the political landscape of it. I think that in terms of sort of the political side of it, I think it's quite tame for Russell. But like I say, I think that it really allowed Ruby to shine along through those sort of time jumps. And I think Millie Gibson, you know, this is very much Ruby's story. Boom was the Doctor's story. This is Ruby letting her shine. And it's amazing to think that this was probably I think the first episode they filmed, and Millie Gibson just sells it through the sheer range of emotions within it. And I think that this was a really sort of tour de force, showing that why Millie Gibson is, you know, the new Who girl. I mean, since we're on characters, Ncuti Gatwa, he's brilliant with what bit he's in. I love his costume. It's giving sort of Sarah Jane, sort of Sontaran experiment look, meets a fisherman, meets the second Doctor. I really like the outfit. I think it's a great little costume. The ending, again, it brings back the horror. It makes the story go full circle. You know, very creepy sort of. It reminded me very much of Susan Hill, The Woman in Black, I think the 1980s film, because there's a bit in that film at the very end where it is very much that sort of scene recreated. So I guess it gives me sort of a classic horror trope really there. Yeah, it did feel very sort of traditional classic horror, very sort of Woman in Black-esque really, which I quite liked. And like I say, the twist, the Susan twist in the episode, you know, felt very much like an Inside Number 9 episode, which I really did like that idea, and sort of the whole sort of going, okay, what's going on? There we have it. That has been my little gut check on 73 Yards. I think that a solid edition, like I said, it's probably my favourite Doctor-lite episode, and that's a bold statement for me to. I mean, I like Turn Left, but you know, 73 Yards, I love the sort of dreamlike aspect, and I love the ambiguity of this story, that it's left for you to decide what these meanings are. And I like that Russell said, you know, I'm not going to explain what the woman says to these people. That's left to you, and I love that. I like it when there is that element there for you to, you know, make your own inferences what it could be, whether that's Ruby's abandonment or whatever we have within that, your own interpretation. It's all valid and correct. But yeah, 73 Yards, it's a story that when I first watched it, I was like, I like it. I'm not sure why I like it, but I know that this is good. And I've rewatched it a couple of times and I'm like, yeah, I really vibe this. So I'm going to give 73 Yards an 8.5 out of 10. Boom's probably the best Doctor story, but this, it's up there. I'm torn between what my favourite is of this season so far. So I think this season, it's been very strong so far. We're halfway through, which is wild. We've got Dot and Bubble next time, which I think is meant to be sort of a commentary on social media. So I think that will be quite a politically charged story. So if you were a little bit disappointed with 73 Yards with sort of the political aspect within this, hopefully Dot and Bubble is that there for you. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, then please do like and subscribe for plenty more Doctor related content coming up in the near future. And I'll see you next time for the Dot and Bubble gut check alongside a 15 Doctor costume tier list video. So thank you very much for watching, and bye bye.